In today's video, I'll be talking about the different states of matter and their properties. So the first main question is, what is a state of matter? The states of matter are one of the distinct forms in which matter can exist. There are three main states of matter, which are solid, liquid, and gas. Now the second main question is, what distinguishes between the different states of matter? Now the answer to this question is simply particles. Now the arrangement of the particles and how closely arranged they are in a matter will determine if they are a solid, liquid, or a gas. Now let's start talking about particle theory. Particle theory is essentially what scientists use to explain the properties of every state of matter, solid, liquid, and gas. In a solid, particles are arranged in regular rows with the particles touching each other. They are held firmly in place by forces of attraction, and because they are so close together, they can only vibrate and cannot move or change places. Particles in a liquid, however, though still arranged, touching each other, are not in a pattern of rows. The particles in liquids are held together by weaker forces of attraction, but they are still able to move past each other. Now, the particles in a gas do not touch each other. They are not attracted to each other, and thus they can move freely. Before I explain the changing state of the state of matters, which is also part of particle theory, I would first like to elaborate on the properties of each state of matter and give some examples for each. The first example of a state of matter is an example of a solid, and it is this recorder that I found in my house. As you can see, it follows the properties of a solid, which is that it has a fixed shape, a fixed volume, it's rigid, and it doesn't flow. An example of a liquid that I found in my house is actually this bottle of eye drops. As you can see, it is not the container which the eye drops are in, which is the liquid part, because that's actually a solid, but in fact the actual eye drop solution inside, which is liquid. As you can see, it follows the properties of a liquid, which it can flow, it's not rigid, it has a fixed volume but not a fixed shape, as it takes the shape of the container it's kept in, which in this case is this small bottle. An example of a gas that we can see in our daily life and is most definitely in my house right now is oxygen. Now oxygen is colorless, so it's basically invisible to the naked eye, so I can't really show that, but there are some gases that exist that do have color. Next, I would like to briefly explain the changing of state of matter. The changing of a state of matter can go from a solid to liquid, a liquid to gas, liquid to solid, or gas to liquid. From a solid to a liquid, it is called melting. From a liquid to a gas, it is called evaporation. From a liquid to a solid, it is called freezing. And from gas to liquid, it is called condensation. These changing of states happen because as the solid, liquid, or gas is heated or cooled, the particles rearrange in accordance to the energy that is being applied to them, whether they are cooled or heated. For example, when the solid is heated, the particles vibrate more because some of the energy is transferred to the particles. Now, the particles may have enough energy to escape the strong forces holding them together in their places, which means they have formed into a liquid and the particles can move past each other. Next, I would like to be explaining diffusion. Now I'm going to be explaining diffusion using particle theory. I'm going to be using the example of putting a drop of food dye into a glass of water and eventually seeing the dye slowly spread out. Eventually, the dye spreads throughout the water, and the water is the color of the food dye. The particles in the food dye and in the water are free to move. The particles of food dye and water move randomly, bumping into each other and changing direction. After some time, these random movements cause them to become evenly spread. This is what is called diffusion. Diffusion also happens in gases. In gases, diffusion is faster as gas particles move more freely than the particles in liquids. Now I will briefly